This is Behind the Headlines, with behind-the-scenes analysis on issues affecting Pennsylvanians, sponsored by the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Now, here's your host.
Welcome to Behind the Headlines. My name is Jerry Strittmatter, a board member of the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy, and joining me today as co-host is Maura Donnelly. Charlie is on assignment, and Maura and I are blessed to have Dr. Martin with us today. So how have you been, Maura?
I'm good, Jerry. How are you doing?
Oh, great, thanks.
Well, I'm really pleased to have, as you mentioned, Dr. Jamie Martin with us here today from APSCUF. And I always like to tell people what APSCUF stands for. So we'll see if I get this right, is the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct, and well done, Maura.
Well, you have a lot going on. I think you've been crazy busy. The state system of higher education has announced some pretty significant consolidations with universities in Pennsylvania. So why don't we start with, tell us what's going on.
Okay. Well, just as the background, the plan has been, a consolidation plan has been presented to the Board of Governors last week. As we've talked about before, the idea is going to be to consolidate Lock Haven, Bloomsburg, and Mansfield universities in the North Central, Edinburgh, Clarion, and California universities in the West. So the plan was presented about 439 pages. So it took us a little bit of time to move through. The plan was voted on by the Board of Governors to move it into what will be about a 2-month public comment period. And so that's where we are right now. But I'd be happy to talk about any of the issues that we have with the plan itself, if you'd like.
Let me start with what, you said 439 pages. What I understand you've had an issue with, there's not much clarity in there. What's missing? What is it that you're looking for as an organization that you're not finding in 439 pages? Because that's
Sure.
a lot.
Yeah, it was a lot to move through. One of the things that we have, concerns for our students, we were hoping to hear or read about to what extent will they be forced into a hybrid model. So how many classes would a student have to take to complete his or her degree, either at the Western or the Northern integration? So we're not sure of that. That question has been answered. We have concerns about the fact that there's not been an economic impact study that was presented in that plan, and that was required. That's a requirement of Act 50. We have concerns about what the students actually think about this. There was no student survey in the plan, really not much comment about what the students think. The chancellor has mentioned that students are willing to take up to 25% of classes online, but we don't know from where that number came. So that wasn't clear. Questions about our student athletes. That they stated in the plan that all 6 campuses will retain their athletic teams, but the NCAA hasn't ruled on that yet. So to put that out as a given is not quite accurate, because the NCAA hasn't decided if that will be permitted. I think the big concern we have is the pace at which this is moving. It started in October, and it was passed at the April, a special board meeting at the end of April. So with the number of questions that are still outstanding, we're just curious as to why we're rushing this through until we can have some of those questions answered.
With all these questions, it seems we've just gone through a disruption of 1.5 years, and there is no normal yet. So it makes no sense with questions and not being back to normal, and with dollars that came from the federal government to help with this transition. It would make all the sense in the world to delay this for at least 1 year, wouldn't you say?
I would say to delay it until we have more clarity. So you're right, Jerry. We're not even certain of what the federal stimulus monies or the monies coming in for dealing with COVID will be. I don't know that we know the full extent of what the impact has been. One thing we do know from our students is that they have not enjoyed the hybrid model. They're not enjoying taking classes the way that the 3 of us are interacting today. And so, the notion that we're going to move students into a situation where they're going to be forced to do that to complete a degree gives us pause. And a big piece of that is we've heard of the need for, and I think this is correct, the need for our K through 12 students to get back into the classroom because of the experiences they are having. And what I've been saying is that need for a face-to-face interaction doesn't end when a student gets a high school diploma. That continues on as they're going into our universities. And so we really think the students deserve answers. And more importantly, think students deserve the opportunity to have their concerns heard before the process continues and this plan is voted on in July, and we start moving towards the most dramatic change in state system history with a lot of questions still unanswered.
Dr. Martin, you just mentioned the process. Where are we? You said that the Board of Governors has approved it. Where are we in the process? And it sounds like it will culminate at some point in July, but what happens between now and July?
What happens is, the Chancellor just testified before the House and Senate Education and Appropriations Committees, so that was part of the requirement of Act 50. But there is supposed to be a public comment period in these 2 months. We were disappointed to hear they're only planning to hold 2 such public comment meetings, hearings, each only 90 minutes in length. So, only 3 hours of public comment to us seems to not be enough given the dramatic nature of these and significant nature of these changes. So I don't know that that's going to be enough time for students to speak up, for staff and faculty to speak up, and even, importantly, for community members who live in these areas where our universities reside. Is 3 hours enough time for all of the concerns, questions that people might have to be voiced and then to be addressed?
With all these questions and all these problems to effectuate this, when I've been talking to people, what I've heard, which is another important part that we haven't gotten to yet, is the economic impact on our businesses and our communities when you go and make these changes to institutions that they rely on in order to do business. Our 14 universities are really economic zones and are economic drivers for all Pennsylvania, the way it's distributed. And this is going to have big impact on the business community and all the other things you do to help with economic development throughout the state. So those minutes, they should have many hours of testimony from the business community, throughout the Commonwealth before they would go and make such a big change. Don't you agree?
Absolutely. And we were hopeful that at the very least there may be 2 opportunities, 2 hearings, 2 meetings in the northern consolidation area and 2 in the western, to provide that opportunity and for business owners, to ask the questions. What is in the report, what exists there is, and what the Chancellor's talked about is the impact's going to be minimal because the universities will still be there. Athletic teams will remain, which is an unknown, and they didn't do an actual study. They did a study in 2015 that showed our universities, the faculty, staff, and students pump about $67 billion into the Pennsylvania economy, and we thought even that might be updated to say, we think that this will continue or it will decline. So that piece is certainly missing, and I agree with you fully that they should provide opportunities for those individuals to voice their concerns and ask their questions, and give them enough time for that to occur.
I know that the report indicates that there will be cost savings, but not initially. It's apparently going to be costly to put this into place. I know this sounds a little crazy, but they want to keep all of those physical spaces in place. There's got to be facilities that won't be used. I mean, does the plan include what they're going to do with these facilities? I mean, I just think there's some obvious issues with saying we're going to continue in the same space, but we're going to be saving money.
Exactly, and this is the other concern we have, is that when this began, the consolidation began, there was this kind of a statement that we can't afford to not do this. We have to do something because of, the financial state of the system. This plan doesn't address that. So the startup costs are estimated at almost $30 million. The savings are estimated to be 18.4 million over 5 years. And so if the costs are 29.6 and the savings are 18.4, I'm not certain how that leads to any kind of improvement in the financial state of the state system. So that's another big piece. I'm glad that you actually brought that up, because that's a question we have. How is this helping the financial system or state of the system if it's not going to yield any savings in that 5 year, 5 years out?
It certainly sounds like a lot of disruption, at least at this point, for not much gain.
Right, and your question about what about the facilities or residence halls, those aren't answered in this plan either.
The thing is, and you were talking about the budget, right or wrong, the federal government's throwing lots and lots of money in a lot of directions, and one of those is the state governments. And it looks as if we have about $8 billion. We can take care of a lot of things with one-time spending, hopefully, with the $6 billion, but that still leaves an awful lot. So that's why I sort of think it's time to have the viewers, understand that there is time that this could be, done properly, which I don't think it should be done at all, but that's just me. But if the viewers want to contact you and you can direct them to their state legislators and senators in the last minute or so, can you, give us, some kind of idea how they should contact you and how they should go about that and what their message should be to the legislators?
Well, anytime they want to contact us, they can just reach us through our website at APSCUF.org. Or actually, if you just type APSCUF into your browser, I'm sure it'll take you right to our website. We have a lot of information there. And I think, Jerry, that the crux of all of this is the lack of appropriate funding for higher education. We're anywhere from 47th to last in the nation in our support for public higher education. So I think that's a big issue that could be communicated to legislators, or if individuals have questions about what's going to be the impact on my community from the consolidation, that could certainly be questions that are asked as well.
Thank you so much, Dr. Martin. We've really appreciated being better informed, and I know our viewers really appreciate what you've been able to tell us. And we'll be back with another segment of Behind the Headlines right after this.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Pennsylvania State Association of Township Supervisors, the largest, most influential municipal association in the Commonwealth. Since 1921, PSATS has been preserving and strengthening township government and securing greater visibility and involvement for townships in the state and federal political arenas. Covering 95% of Pennsylvania's land mass, townships represent 5.5 million residents, more than any other type of political subdivision in Pennsylvania. Additional underwriting provided by the Worrell Corporation Foundation, based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Visit pahighwayinfo.org.
Welcome back to this segment of Behind the Headlines. Maura and I are very blessed to have Charlie Gerow, who's the CEO of Quantum Communications, with us today to better inform us. Charlie's will be a very great guest because of the fact that he knows everything about Pennsylvania, and he's traveled all around Pennsylvania and listens to all the people. So we're looking forward, Charlie, to hear what the important issues are that are on people's minds today in Pennsylvania.
Well, I'm delighted to be with you, Jerry. I got to tell you that I don't know everything about Pennsylvania. I have traveled around an awful lot, and the more I travel around, the more I realize there's so much to learn about this great state of ours.
Well, we've definitely had a lot going on, Charlie. So I just want to jump right into questions here. Governor announced that pretty soon we'll be lifting a lot of our lockdowns. which is, I don't know, more than a year since they started. Some would say very restrictive, should not have happened the way that they did. I'm just curious how you feel about that. I'm guessing you have an opinion.
Yeah, darn nice of the governor to tell us we can go back to work. Look, these lockdowns and shutdowns were of very, very questionable validity as a matter of public policy. But the way that Tom Wolf went about them was arbitrary and capricious to begin with, Mara, and ended up being vindictive and punitive. I mean, you saw what he did to Little Lebanon County because they didn't genuflect before his edicts early on in the pandemic. That was the problem here. There never was necessarily any true science attached to a lot of these lockdown orders. And if there was, we never learned about it because the administration of Tom Wolf decided to be as untransparent as they could possibly be. Didn't want to talk to anybody, didn't want to let anybody know the decision-making process or what data or input had been given to them upon which they were making these decisions. And they refused to talk about Jerry Strittmatter's former body, the General Assembly, the elected representatives of the people, about anything. So yeah, I do have an opinion about Tom Wolf and Rachel Levine in the last year and a quarter.
So everybody, and I'm not accusing you of being this, but everybody's a Monday morning quarterback when it comes to what should have been, how it should have been handled. But just in general terms, what would you have done differently? How would you have handled this differently? If you were
I was in on this tune from the very beginning, Mara, as you know. It may be Monday morning quarterbacking for some, but from the very beginning, I said, A, there ought to be total transparency about any lockdown and shutdown orders. B, there ought to be limitations on how long those emergency provisions and powers can be extended. And we're talking about that now with a constitutional amendment, as you know. And I was at the rallies talking about reopening Pennsylvania because it was so vitally important for people to be able to feed their families, for their kids to go to school, and for us to have as great a degree of normality as we possibly could through this pandemic. We saw how other governors handled it. Ron DeSantis in Florida, a prime example, and we've seen the results there as well. We didn't do as well as some of the states that were much more open than we were.
Really too bad that we've wasted so much time, getting back, back to normal because we have so many things to worry about, especially with the energy industry, and that we should have everybody back and know how we're going to try to overcome these proposals at the federal level. What are your views on that and the shutdown of the Keystone pipeline?
The Keystone pipeline, Jerry, as you know, is another matter altogether and is an evidence of really how far to the left Joe Biden and his administration have run very, very quickly. They haven't gone there, they ran there. I mean, Biden told us during the campaign there would be no ban on fracking, that he really was winking a nod pro-fracking, pro-development of natural gas. And then the first thing that he does is issue a bunch of executive orders that by regulation serve to begin to ban fracking, knock down the Keystone XL pipeline, which is really, when you think about it, crazy public policy, because that natural oil and gas is going to continue to flow. It's just going to come to us through much more less reliable and less safe means of transportation, on trucks, on trains, and on barges, which aren't as safe as through pipelines.
And it really affects, with the whole proposal for infrastructure that goes into as you were mentioning about the highways. It's been so long since the federal government has given the dollars that are needed, and there's so much that needs to be done. What are your views on that? What are you hearing from the people as you travel around the state?
Well, what I'm hearing, Jerry, is that there is a new definition to quote unquote infrastructure. It's never a word I really like because it didn't provide much meaning to ordinary folks. I mean, the folks in my neighborhood don't talk about infrastructure. They talk about roads, and bridges, and ports, and pipelines, even broadband. But the Biden proposal on infrastructure is everything but. I mean, a very, very small portion of those $2 trillion+ that they're asking our children and grandchildren to foot the bill for are actually used for roads and bridges. I don't know too many people that would argue about the need for enhanced funding for roads and bridges, but for all this other stuff, big question mark, especially when we realize what the price tag is.
Charlie, how's our state budget looking this year? I know there is a lot of states are getting a lot of money from the federal government. What are you seeing in terms of our budget process this year? And first, do you think it's going to be on time? And second, anything of importance or note within the budget that everybody should be aware of?
Well, on time is always an interesting definition, Mara, as you and Jerry both know so well. I won't make any predictions about it being quote unquote on time, but I suspect that the legislators will get a vacation pretty much when they want one. The danger, of course, is with the quote unquote federal money, and there is no such thing as federal money, it's taxpayers' money coming from a different source, that some in the state government will say, well, let's just spend that now and in effect kick the can down the road with all of the budgetary issues that come before us. That's exactly what Ed Rendell did with the quote unquote stimulus money that the Obama administration provided. And then they accused Tom Corbett of cutting $1 billion from education, which of course he didn't do, but those were federal dollars that went away. My hope is, pardon me, that they'll use at least a significant portion of those federal dollars that are coming into the state coffers this year for highways, bridges, roads, et cetera, because so much of the motor license fund has been siphoned off for other uses over the course of the past few years.
So I understand that some of the, oh God.
I was just going to add before your question, especially with the state police, taking over $700 million, out of the general fund, this would be a good time to correct that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Jerry. I mean, that's what I was referring to. And just so we're clear, I know Representative Stittmatter that nobody begrudges the state police one dime. It's a question of where those funds come from. Are they coming out of the general fund where they should be coming from? Or are they coming out of the motor license fund, which is specifically designed for roads and bridges, the upkeep, maintenance, and building of those vital pieces of our lives?
I imagine if we polled many Pennsylvanians and asked them where they'd like that motor license fund money to go to, they would say to roads and bridges. So
absolutely.
Yeah, it seems like a no-brainer, but it's one of those issues that just doesn't get resolved quickly. It hasn't been resolved yet. So I would like to circle back though, because I want to make sure that our viewers are really paying attention to the constitutional amendments that are on the ballot on May 18th. Because they are related to our first conversation, the governor's powers and lockdowns and emergency orders and everything. And so tell us a little bit about those and what our viewers, don't tell them how to vote, but nudge them in the right direction.
Well, how about if I tell them how I'm going to vote, Mara? Would that be okay?
That's good.
I'm voting yes and yes on the two constitutional amendments having to do with the powers of the governor under these so-called emergency orders and emergency powers. I don't think the General Assembly, and I would love to hear Jerry Strittmatter tell us about it because I think he was there when the law was put into effect. I don't think that anybody in the General Assembly ever contemplated emergency powers and emergency orders extending for over a year. And so the constitutional amendment that would limit the duration of time, I think is especially important. So is the one that would give the General Assembly the power to step in. They tried to do that multiple times over the course of the past year, but Tom Wolf waved his little veto pen every single time and vetoed significant legislation that was passed often in bipartisan ways, but unfortunately not with enough Democrat votes to override his veto. They came very close, and I think they thought they actually were going to be able to do it on one occasion, but ultimately it failed. So this would give a constitutional protection for the people of Pennsylvania against a governor who wanted to simply ignore the General Assembly, ignore the manifest wishes of the people through their elected representatives, and extend these emergency declarations ad infinitum.
In the
And
last,
this will be the first time it appears on the ballot?
Yes.
Is it going to have to be on there twice?
No. It has to pass the General Assembly twice, which it has done.
Okay.
It's now on the ballot as a referendum for the people.
So it'll go into effect after the election then?
Exactly.
Passes. Okay, thank you.
in the last 2 minutes that we have, I'd like to make sure that you let all our viewers know some of the other hot button issues that are going to be in the budget. But going back to your reference to when this was put in after 3 Mile Island, that it was never thought of that this would be something that would go on not only for 1 year, but with the opioid crisis, we're doing it 3 years. You know, we're into it. And so there has to be a better way of managing state government than by crisis. So in the last 2 minutes now, what else would you like our viewers to know that you've been listening to, that people want to know, or maybe our legislators, that they should be doing in the next couple weeks?
Well, Jerry, you put it so well and so succinctly. That's exactly the issue with respect to these constitutional amendments. And I think people are just looking for our state to both return to normal, not some new normal or, differentiated normal, but to get back to the basics that we all enjoy and love, and to see our state become attractive again to folks from other places, and an attractive place for our children to stay, to live and work, so that you don't have to buy an airplane ticket to see your grandchildren. And so that jobs and opportunity are flourishing here in Pennsylvania, because we really have it all, but we've held it back by, in my judgment, 3 things: excessive taxation, punitive regulation, and regulation is a tax at the core, and basic corruption, because few businesses want to come to Pennsylvania, where in too many places there's a pay-to-play culture. They simply don't want to deal with that. So I think there's a lot of ways that we can make Pennsylvania really, really attractive again and bring jobs and opportunities for the future generations.
Thank you so much for giving all of our viewers such a great insight. Thank you, Charlie.
Great to be with you, Jerry and Mark. Thank you for having me.
We'll be back with another edition of Behind the Headlines next week. Thank you.